I turn my fruit scraps into food, medicine, and my main household cleaner. How? By turning them into vinegar. It's an incredibly simple process, and I'll show you how to do that right now. Making scrappy vinegar is virtually zero cost. You're using something that you would normally be throwing away, and you're turning it into food that can be used as a meat marinade, in your bone broths to help extract the maximum nutrients, in your medicinal preparations, your fire cider and other tonics. It's great as an antibacterial and acidic tonic. And it's also a valuable cleanser. It's great used topically and just around your home. You can clean your counters, your bathroom, your everything with vinegar. Let's take a look at what we need to get started. We're going to need some fruit scraps. I most frequently use apples and pears, but you could definitely experiment with other types of fruit scraps that you might have on hand more frequently. I suggest that the scraps are organic and that you've washed them well. I do this with Sal's Suds. That's what I use to wash all of my produce. Somewhat optionally, a sweetener really does help to make a stronger vinegar and give it something to kind of feed the fermentation and help things just go along a little more smoothly. I like to use molasses. You can use any type of sugar or sweetener that you prefer though. And a little bit of vinegar from a previous batch or some raw apple cider vinegar from the store, just a splash to kind of introduce the good bacteria that we want to cultivate, goes a long way towards making sure that nothing goes awry in the beginning stages. First thing, I'm gonna get these apples peeled. So I've peeled enough apples to make a pie. I'm just gonna stick these in the fridge and use them later. But that gave me enough scraps to do about a half a gallon batch of vinegar. This is about the minimum amount of scraps I'd want for this size of jar. You could even fill it a little bit further to about 2 inches from the top. And first thing we're gonna do is get this covered with water. A note about the water is you don't want it to have chlorine or fluoride in it. So if that's something that you deal with, then maybe look at buying filtered water. You need enough water to completely cover your scraps, but you wanna leave yourself at least an inch of headroom so that as things ferment, you don't end up with any unexpected overflow. I'm gonna add a little bit of vinegar from a previous batch just to get it inoculated with all of the right bacteria. It just helps things go way smoother. So if you're doing this for the first time, use a little bit of store-bought vinegar, make sure it's raw, and just a tablespoon or two, really, just to get it kick-started in the right direction. So the other thing that helps get this off to a really good start is adding a little bit of sweetener to just give those bacteria something to eat while they ferment. And I'm choosing to use some molasses, but you can use a couple tablespoons up to even a quarter cup for a half gallon jar of some kind of sweetener. Mix it just a little bit to make sure everything's combined. All right, now you have an option. You can use a fermentation weight or not. The fermentation weight does make it a little easier, a little more hands-off, but it's totally optional. If you're using a fermentation weight, it will just keep most of those little floaties beneath the water and you won't have as much chance of things maybe molding. If you're not using a fermentation weight, which I don't when I make larger batches, then you're just gonna need to make sure that you get in there every day or two and mix things and make sure that all of your little scraps are at least getting saturated, if not staying under the liquid. And this is to prevent mold. Now all we need to do is cover our jar with something breathable. So you can use a coffee filter, cheesecloth. I always have old cloth napkins laying around, so that's what I usually use to cover my ferments. And secure it with a canning ring, rubber band, something. We're gonna set this somewhere room temperature. It could be a cupboard, a closet, your counter. For usually about 2 weeks, you're gonna see this start to bubble a lot. If you check on it every day, you'll see lots and lots of bubble activity within a few days usually. And once it has stopped bubbling, give it another 5 days, maybe a week, to let it just kind of develop its flavors and finish fermenting, and then we'll move on to the next step. I started this batch a few weeks ago with a bunch of scraps from pears that I had processed, and it is now ready to be strained and move on to its next step. You can see on top that there is some kind of white film. That is a type of yeast that is totally okay, not concerning at all. The only thing that would be concerning is if you saw like a green or any kind of actual tall fuzzy molds. And even then your batch is probably salvageable, just scoop out that little portion of mold. But this looks great, totally normal. We're just gonna get this strained out into a clean jar. This jar is the worst to pour from. This is definitely gonna make a mess. I'm gonna take some of this out here first. Now that we've got all of the fruit pulp strained out, we're gonna cover it with a cloth one more time. It needs just a little bit more fermentation. So give it another 5 days to a week, and then you can start tasting it if you'd like. And I usually go about 2 more weeks at this point, and then put on a solid airtight lid. Store it in your pantry or your cupboard just like you would any other vinegar, and it has a fairly indefinite shelf life. Vinegar doesn't really go bad. And that's all there is to it. I am going to feed all of this fruit pulp to my chickens and get another great use out of it. Homemade vinegar truly is one of my very favorite things, so I was really delighted to share this with you today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll see you guys next week.